I want to welcome our next artist to the stage. I'm really excited to hear from Victoria. Victoria Tori Jaenig is a 3-time award-winning Indigenous storyteller, media artist, and producer, and has produced over 30 short films, music videos, documentaries, and international videos. She has curated and exhibited her body of works in solo exhibitions and festivals for over 20 years. Victoria toured parts of Europe, Western Canada, and Northwestern USA as a dance and theatre performer with Secwepemc Theatre, Rainbow Productions, and Nakulaman Performance Collective. With productions she performed in, wrote, directed, and/or produced. This experience has led her to be a mentor and instructor of Indigenous storytelling and performance, media arts, marketing classes, and portfolio development as part of the National Indigenous Professional Artist Training, the NIPAT program, at the internationally renowned Indigenous Post-Secondary Institute and Naukin Center, which has been an incredible foundation for creative practice here in Syilx territories. So please join me in welcoming Victoria.
Hello? Before I begin, I just wanted to, I have an issue with my thyroid, and my physicians are currently changing my medication, so it affects my throat. So sometimes, like, you see me getting up, because I don't want to get into these little coughing fits. So you see me, I have these lozenges, I have a hot drink and a cold drink, because sometimes those help with those. Wai puchiap go ubisio, dalik and limp di bisnak silach, no his lachlacht. I squeeze kokana, I samak squeeze Victoria Jaenig. Wrong one. Good afternoon, ladies, genderqueers, gentlemen, and folks beyond the binary. I'm Victoria Jaenig. My Syilxian name is Kwachana, which translates to dust dancer, but visually describes the little whirlwinds, those little dust clouds that appear behind someone who is dancing. I live up to my name through my arts and entrepreneurial practices as I dance through my life, creating little storms behind me and around me. Kinchkichki til piat sulau, kintil simpington, Kintil Sukinakain in Chakun Syilx, Nalk Secwepemc, Nalk Calvel. I am from Penticton. I am a registered member of the Penticton Indian Band. Specifically, I arrived here from the land of the red-tailed hawk, and I am from the place identified as the Okanagan, and I am Syilx. I am also Secwepemc and Calvel. As a Syilx storyteller, I would like to recognize the importance of place. And as a language apprentice, I'd like to stress the importance of correct land acknowledgements. So I would like to welcome you to University Theatre for UBCO's 2024 Indigenous Arts Intensive program. And I would like to acknowledge the wonderful folks from the university and the residents of Kamloops for inviting us to be here today. That's what an incorrect land acknowledgement sounds like to me. And that is exactly why I start with the importance of place and stressing the importance of correct land acknowledgements. So if I were to ask, Kakinihi, where are we? What would you tell me? And I'm actually asking you guys. Where are we? Kelowna? Any guesses? We're at UBCO. We're also in the University Theatre. We're on Alumni Avenue. We're in Kelowna, the Okanagan Valley, the Central Okanagan, British Columbia, Canada, North America, and Earth. That's a lot of places that you acknowledge and identify with. Places that you've learned and names that you've memorized. So in my introduction, when I said, Kinchkichki til piatsulau, kinto sempingten, kinto sukanakain, I am specifically and generally acknowledging where I came from to be here. Piatsulau, Piabi's upper village. Sempingten is Penticton, Sukanakain is the Okanagan. That is how we acknowledge the land as Syilx people, by addressing the place name. And for this place, it is the place closest to us that I am aware of, and how I would acknowledge the land that we are currently located. In my opinion, the term land acknowledgement isn't correct, because what comes after it is not the land that you are acknowledging, but the people whose territory that you're on. So since somebody here gave me a microphone, one of the things that I would like you all to remember is when you want to acknowledge the Indigenous people whose territory you are on, it is not called an Indigenous land acknowledgement. It is a territorial recognition. And it is a territorial recognition of the traditional, unsurrendered, ancestral and unceded lands of the host nation that you are currently occupying. And in this place, you are recognizing that this is the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx, who have been here since time immemorial. This territory was not shared with any other nation or group, and it was never ceded nor surrendered to this foreign governing authority known as Canada. As such, to include any other nation, group, or organization in a territorial recognition would not only be incorrect and inappropriate, but it may be considered offensive to the original inhabitants to the place that we know as Pawas. And so now that we got that out of the way, as a Syilx descendant, I would like to welcome you with a song. You do not need to rise or remove your hats while I sing, as we are not in ceremony, and that is not our way. I get kind of loud, so I'm going to hold the microphone away from me. Thank you. That is the Okanagan Honor Song, and it is also recognized as an Okanagan anthem. And the words in that song translate, because we are beautiful, and because we are Okanagan, this is our land. And sometimes when people translate that, they say, we are beautiful, we are Okanagan because of our land. And both are correct. I choose to start this discussion this way for many reasons. The biggest being that incorrect terminology used by organizations and businesses looking to reconcile with local First Nations communities are unknowingly doing the opposite. A true land acknowledgement recognizes place names. A territorial recognition identifies the host nation. And a reconciliation statement states your commitment to recognize with Indigenous peoples, which includes First Nations, Inuit, chartered Métis communities, and urban Indigenous groups and organizations. Oh, I don't know why I'm so nervous. Understanding the difference and taking the time to remember, not read, your organization's territorial recognition will go a long ways to building relationships with your host community and demonstrate your organization's commitment to true, not performative reconciliation. And so I will share examples using this area. I keep going to the wrong screens. Sorry, I went ahead. A territorial recognition. We respectfully recognize the Syilx Okanagan Nation and their peoples, whose traditional ancestral unceded territory our facility is situated. And a proper reconciliation statement. We proudly serve as partners to our host nation, the Syilx Okanagan peoples, who have been here since time immemorial, and the local Inuit and urban Indigenous organizations, and the chartered Métis communities currently occupying the unceded Syilx people's ancestral homelands. Both of those are true and inclusive statements, and they identify the intent of what is being expressed and doesn't offend your host nation or the other Indigenous peoples and groups. Oh, I'm doing it again. Oh no, sorry. I got two screens going. So I'd just like to make a trigger warning announcement. Becoming a community storyteller, convalescing past intergenerational survivorship includes a short clip from a residential school survivor sharing her experiences and includes commentary on the intergenerational effects of residential school. Indigenous languages and teachings are so specific that when you grow up learning or around it, when you grow up learning or you grow up around it, the way that our brains work is different, and using correct terminology matters. I call myself a community storyteller because I insert myself into the stories that I share. I personalize them with my purpose and intentions, and like my ancestors, there's always a lesson in that, and something that I want you to remember, because words matter. I chose my words carefully. Convalescence, intergenerational, survivorship. I also want to note that I personally will never use the terms colonize, colonizer, or decolonize in any of its contextualizations as it applies to the descriptions of Indigenous people. Specifically when describing Indigenous peoples of BC and within Canada, because I will not contribute to the documentation that I, as an Indigenous woman of Syilx, Secwepemc, and Kauville ancestry, has ceded my indigeneity by recognizing foreign governing authorities as my colonizer and admit to being colonized or my people. I assert that while our languages are endangered, they're not extinct. Our practices, although limited in practitioners, are still being practiced. We sing our songs, we dance our dances, we include the stories, we harvest our plants and animals for food and its materials. We have language speakers, knowledge keepers, knowledge holders, and knowledge makers. We learn, we share, we teach, and we celebrate. Now I want you to imagine what life was like in 1850, 1820, or even 1800s, the time of pre-contact and early contact in this area. What do you see? What are the people wearing? What do you hear? What are the people doing? Where are they? Now imagine what it's like in the 1900s, 1910, 1930, the 1950s and 1960s. What's different? Now what's happening? To understand the importance of healing and recovery of Indigenous peoples to move past the 150 to 175 years of trauma, we need to identify the impacts those traumas have had on us and our people. This didn't happen thousands of years ago like some people think. It happened within our generations and our parents' lifetimes. And as a community storyteller, we need to be aware of these things so we understand our roles as storytellers or as artists in our communities. Story time. About 15 years ago, I was in Prince George. Oh, no, maybe more than 15. It's probably closer to 25 years now, because I'm going to be 45 next week. So probably about 25 years ago, I was in Prince George as a guest, and I was walking down this hallway, and I had my bag over my shoulder, and I had my keys attached to my bag. And as I was walking, the keys hit the side of my leg. In the room that I was going to, an Indigenous man, an elder from that community, when I walked in, he was frozen. And I could see him. So when I walked in and I looked at him, he went white. Those are the kinds of triggers that residential school had and how they impacted our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. A long time ago, as a student of residential school, you would hear the keys banging against your leg, and you knew that something bad was going to happen to you or to somebody else. And so when he heard me walking down the hallway, and he heard, and I opened the door, and I walked in and I looked at him, he froze. I immediately triggered his trauma response because he thought it was his turn. And he was a medicine man. He was a healer. And I share that because the intergenerational and lasting effects of residential school impacts 100% of Indigenous people that you know, whether as a survivor or as an intergenerational survivor. And it's really important that we recognize that. Oh, and one of the other things that I wanted to acknowledge was with the announcement of the Estuichwe, the missing from Kamloops to Secwepemc for the 215 little ones. When that announcement happened, my mother's a residential school survivor, and I I traveled with my mom a lot, being her driver, and I would take her to these different places, these different meetings. And she's done a lot of healing as a survivor of residential school. But when they made that announcement, my mom was put immediately re-triggered back to the moments where every single time she asked about somebody who was no longer in her school or no longer in her presence was in the forefront of her mind. And she felt guilt being a kid for not being able to do anything about it, not saying anything about it. Even decades later, she still had that guilt inside. And so I brought my mom to go see her sister, who's in Kamloops. And my family, my ancestral ties are with Simpington and Kamloops to Secwepemc. That's where my family's come from. And so we went to go see my auntie, and I brought my mom there. And when they first seen each other, even though they've done a lot of healing and a lot of different things, that announcement triggered their traumatic memories enough for when they came face to face, they were scared to embrace. They were frozen, looking at each other. It took me and my cousin, my aunt's daughter, to tell them it was okay to embrace. That's how powerful and lasting the impacts of residential school had on who we are as a people. And some of these practices and teachings that were brought about in residential school are making their way through Indigenous culture and ways of being. As an example, you see my grandparents there. That's William and Lillian Armstrong and John Baptiste. Those are my grandparents. And one of the things that they told me was that when somebody is doing a prayer or a song, it is not our customs as Syilx people to stand up and rise or to remove our hats. That is a trait that was learned in residential school. And as our survivors are reintegrating their Indigenous Syilx teachings, their Indigenous teachings and ways of knowing and being, as they're reteaching themselves and reclaiming those, some of those practices are coming out in Indigenous culture. Another one is children are meant to be seen and not heard. How many of you guys have heard that? How many of you guys have said that? Kids are being loud, kids are playing, kids are asking you questions. Children are meant to be seen and not heard. Be quiet, be quiet. How many of you guys have heard that or said that? But what my grandparents would tell me is that anybody who told me to be quiet, it wasn't their place to do so. That it was my job as a kid to be loud, to ask questions, to play and to laugh, and to make mistakes. So I did. I have no problem now using my voice. I have no problem now making space for myself. I have no problem ensuring that people hear my voice, even if it's shaking while I'm talking. And that's something that I can thank my grandparents for. Not everybody was fortunate to have that. Sorry. Another practice that's been adopted is becoming pregnant, especially if you're younger than 30. Oh my God, these babies are just having babies. oh my gosh, it's kids just having kids. But our bodies are built to have babies. And I was a teen mom. I got pregnant at 15, and I had my first son at 16. And when I told my parents and my grandparents, they didn't get mad at me. Excuse me. Instead, they told me that pregnancy is a gift that not everyone gets to experience, and to never forget that. So I never did. They also told me that a child or the baby that comes from the pregnancy is a gift from the Creator, and it will be a tie to Creator, my tie or my connection through my Creator, and our when you know something, you know, I can't think of the word, but like the purpose behind something, when you need something to be explained or whatever, and when we need our lives or our beliefs or anything to be explained to us, that we remember the connection that we have as children and as babies in our stomachs, because they are the only ones who've ever heard our heartbeat from the inside. And we are the only ones who've ever heard our parents, our mother's heartbeat from the inside. And so that connection is a gift and a celebration. And it's proof. That's the word I was looking for. Real simple, I got word salad, sorry guys. But it's proof of Creator and creation and our connection to things. Indigenous people are, as storytellers or in stories, are generally stereotyped into 4 groups. Drugs, drinking, hand drums, or deerskin. Those are the 4 stereotypes that generally accompany Indigenous people in stories, in mass media. There's no in between. You're either super traditional, or you know who you are. You talk to animals and you sing and you have this connection with Creator, or you're an alcoholic and a drug addict and a homeless living on the streets. And the reason I say that and bring that up is I was in a coffee shop in Kamloops, and I've spent 35 of my 45 years of life being sober, not drinking. And I was at a coffee shop, a cafe, because the cafes, they also sell alcohol. And I was working, and there's a lady, a Caucasian lady, who was 2 tables over from me. And I was working on a business plan for another artist that I knew in the area. And she was sitting there drinking wine. And she probably had about 4 glasses while I was there. And I probably had about the equivalent in coffee. And as she got intoxicated or inebriated, she decided to point out the irony of me being in this coffee shop sober while she was sitting beside me drunk, and she laughed. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't know why you felt the need to share that with me, or why you needed to say that, but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to ask you a question. When we as human beings, when we first have the opportunity to drink, what happens? Whether we're in our teens or early 20s, when people start drinking, they usually drink in excess. And they're usually the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones dancing and whooping, hollering and playing around. And you can walk into a conference, a gathering, a group, and you can ask people, who drinks here? And all of those new drinkers will be like, me, I do, yeah, let's do shots. Let's have this, let's try some wine, let's try this. And they will say that. And then there are those in the background who've been drinking for 20, 30 years, even if it's not in excess. They'll just sit there with their glass, have a drink, hold it up and cheers. Now I bring that up because as Indigenous people, drinking has only been introduced to us recently, within the last 100, 150 years. So we have whole generations that are new to drinking, whereas alcohol was invented in like the 1200s, like early BC, before time was time. So when we look at the effects that alcohol has intergenerationally over consumption and use, we start out running out the door and being loud and drinking as much as we can and passing out, and till we get to a point of either being able to control the alcohol we consume or deciding not to do it. But one thing that's happening within Indigenous communities and territories all over Canada and the United States is the realization that alcohol and drugs has no place in our lives, and that even though our communities have only been drinking for 100 years, 50 years, 75 years, we have whole groups and organizations and programs in our community to bring about the health and wellness of our people, because we know that's not for us. We know that's not who we are. We know that's not what we want. We know that's not how we want to feel or what we want to do. And that's not something that every other culture exposed to alcohol comes to. And then I have another story, a little short story that I wanted to share. Is a couple of years ago, my friend and I realized that there was a day called the International Day of Social Justice. And during this time, there was these demonstrations across Indigenous communities about what was happening in northern BC with the tribes over there. And they wanted to host a protest, stage a protest. So we did. And there's only a few of us. I think there's only like 5, 10, 12 of us on a busy highway on different sides. But one of the things that I noticed was the Indigenous specific racism that we were faced being on the side of the road. We had people shouting at us, pretending that they were going to run us over. People were posting pictures and talking about how, there was like pictures of like blood splatter on car fronts. And these are people that are our peers, people in our communities and people that we know. And I remember standing on the side of the road with one of these signs that were actually made from recycled fabric from tule reeds, I believe. And we were standing on the side of the road with these protest signs, and this woman drove by, blaring her horn, and she was like, "Get off the road and go home." It's like, I am home. You go home, right? And that's something that people say when they're looking at making racist claims to people of color and Indigenous, even if they don't even realize they're speaking to Indigenous groups, they tell us to go home, not fully understanding the comments that they're making, that this is our home. This is where we come from. And we're not the ones who need to go home. We are home. Down here. So, I'm just going to grab another. I can feel like I'm going to start coughing soon. So the work that I do, primarily in any discipline, because I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I work in media, I work in video, computer graphics, web design. I utilize my skills and abilities to create communication strategies and business plans for Indigenous artists and communities. And part of the work that I'm going to be doing here as an artist in residence is sharing parts of my story. And I've labeled it my incredible journey because not because I'm like trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but because the experiences that I had growing up and who I am and where my feet have brought me is not a common experience. And so my mother and her siblings, they're Indian residential school survivors, and my dad and his siblings are not. My grandparents were alive when settlers first arrived here. And although KRI, like the Kamloops Indian Residential School, was founded in 1893 and closed in 1978, it actually stayed open until 1984, and I was 5 years old. And through all of that, I was raised in a safe home of harvesters, language speakers, and knowledge keepers. And I was trained in the art of storytelling and performance using Syilx methodologies and lifestyles, practices, or worldviews. I toured Europe when I was 15 as an Indigenous storyteller, and I performed in Vienna and Hungary in front of royalty. I'm an apprentice to the Syilxian language, songs, dance, ceremony, and protocols. And I am one of the few trained dancers and storytellers with Syilx and Secwepemc and Colville mentors. One of the trainings that I actually had to undertake as a singer and a hand drummer, before I could pick up my drum, because of the family that I grew up in, I was taught the protocols that come with it, and I had to do certain things before I could actually sing, before I could have a drum. We didn't just join drum making workshops and all of a sudden have one. We didn't buy a drum and join a drum line. Before we were allowed to sing or use our drum, we had to be trained. And one of the things that I will share, without going into details, was that I had to earn my drumstick. When I first started hand drumming, I was given a stick with a styrofoam cup on top. And that's what I was allowed to use with my uncles who were around the big drum and who were around hand drums. And until I could keep a beat and until I could use it properly, I wasn't allowed to get a drumstick, and I wasn't allowed to use the drum or sing the songs as the lead singer. And that's what I mean when I say that I'm one of the few trained dancers and singers in our area. And I don't say that to be boastful. I say that to help explain where I'm coming from and why I'm sharing this with you. And so, through my earlier work as a storyteller, first with the Secwepemc Theatre Society, it was the first time that we started performing Indigenous stories, the Secwepemc stories. And we were we had to do everything right from scratch. We had to work the buckskin, work the hides, make our outfits, make all of our accessories. We had to take the stories and learn how to perform them. And that group is the one that we went to Europe with. So when we went to Europe, not only did we have the Secwepemc language and stories and songs in there, but because in Austria the primary language is German, we would also have to deliver our lines and our movements. Then we'd have to stop, because on the side of the stage there was either a male or a female voice over that would translate what we were saying in German. And from there, after I did that, I was brought on to the Inauken Center, and I helped with the 6 other performers there. We assisted in revitalizing Seal of Performance back into our community. Because previous to that, I don't remember witnessing, before Nukulaman, I don't remember coming to community to witness our stories being performed in character, where we came out as coyote and bear and eagle and magpie. The character that I am most commonly remembered as is Magpie or Anne. And I forgot where I was going with that. And lastly, I'm a 3-time award-winning Indigenous storyteller, media artist, and producer. And I curate visual or media arts exhibitions and performances, primarily supporting emergent Indigenous artists. Now, one of the reasons that I share this with you, again, isn't because I'm trying to boast about my skills and abilities, but in my experience, when I tell people the work that I'm doing with Indigenous storytelling and performance, as soon as they find out that I don't have the letters behind my name, my work is automatically discredited. Nobody outside of Indigenous communities themselves recognize lived experience and our traditional knowledge exchanges through mentor and apprentice. And so, because this is the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that I earned my place up here. Even if I don't have the letters behind my name, I worked very hard. I started when I was 15, and I started training like at 5-6 years old. I was surrounded by language speakers and stories and performance. Our grandparents would get us together on weekends to tell us these stories. We would go to harvesting camps, and we'd be out on the land, and we'd be picking the natural materials and making things with them. We would be at a hunting camp, and we'd be processing the animals, whether they were birds or the four-leggeds or fish. That's something that I was grown up doing, and what I was taught and how I was raised. And that's not something that a lot of my peers, especially my Indigenous peers, got to experience. So now I'm going to show you two samples of my work. I got a video clip from a documentary that I produced. I was actually an associate producer for 7 documentaries. And the clip that I'm going to show you is an interview titled Audrey's Story. And it's only 3 or 4 minutes long. But I just want to share that she, as a residential school survivor, she shares stories and witness accounts of things that were traumatic, involving physical abuse, sexual abuse, death, and to just realize that coming into it. And the second is a clip of from a music video that I produced just out of film school, and it was with Seal hip hop artist Sam Mitchell and Silicon Smelkamika artist John Travasket. And both of these works are an example of contemporary methods of convalescing past intergenerational survivorship, and that's why I'm sharing them.
That's where they abuse them. More often than not, it was sexual abuse. There's a lot of the students and stuff that kind of went missing while I was there. On Sundays, one of the things we used to have to do is we used to have to go for these walks. I think I was in grade 5 when we were all starting to go on our walk, and we went by the barn because the boys, they had to look after the cows and other animals that were up at the school. And we were going on that walk, and we were walking past the barn, and some of the little kids that were ahead of us started screaming, and they started pointing towards the barn, and turned down and we looked towards the barn, and there was 5 of the boys there that had hung themselves. I don't know what they did with the boys' bodies after they were taken down. Everything that we went through there was normal because everybody was getting the same thing. And so when we came home and the abuse was at home, it was normal. Because there wasn't any, we didn't know anything else. The majority of us forgot what it was like before. A lot of the things that went on there, we all knew. Probably the whole school knew. But we were so well trained that what went on after the lights went out, or what went on when you got called into another room, was it stayed there. You didn't talk about it or anything. And that, I think that's one of the things that a lot of us brought home. Having spent so much time at the residential school, there was certain tones, certain words, certain actions that were triggers. If you learned the tone, if you learned the action, and if you learned the words, and you used them, it would flip me. And you could tell me to do just about anything and I would do it without a question. We had gotten so conditioned to doing whatever we were told and to do it without question or you got punished. what it all boils down to is that the common denominator between any community or any reserve that has had a lot of their community members going to residential school, all of it is normal because they don't know or don't remember any of the way of life.
And so that's just a portion of my mom's interview. In that video, she explains a lot, sometimes in great detail, the things that she witnessed or experienced. And my mom has been an advocate and a supporter of residential school survivors and intergenerational survivors of residential school most of my life, which is probably why a lot of the work that I do comes from being an intergenerational survivor. And I consider the body of work and the foundation of my life's work to be convalescing past intergenerational survivorship. And it's because it's not just my mom, it's my best friend's mom and my cousin's mom and this community's auntie and this person's grandma. We all, every single one of us, are directly or indirectly impacted by residential school. And although I didn't want my presentation to be solely about residential school, I wanted to be able to express in this platform, through this, in this manner, what it means to be a community storyteller, an Indigenous community storyteller, through whatever arts medium that we have. We're all artists in this room. We all come from a place where we're taking something, whether it's good or bad, and we're turning it into something beautiful or controversial, or we're sharing our histories or our stories with anybody who's going to listen. And a lot of the work that's produced by Indigenous peoples, even if it's subconsciously or unconsciously done, is a result of being an intergenerational survivor, even if they don't even have them, those direct ties in communities, because in the 1800s, Canada made it legal to kidnap Indigenous children and rehome them. First in residential schools, and then in the 60s scoop, and still today we call it the millennial scoop, and that's the current child foster care system. Because a lot of our children are, many of our children are in care or in foster care, not because we're bad parents, not because we don't know how to take care of our kids, but because there's big money in raising and being and holding guardianship over Indigenous children. Okay, so we'll go to the next video, which is this is a music video that I produced with Sam Mitchell and John Turbasket, and this song is called For My Natives. And this song is a song that they wrote also convalescing past intergenerational survivorship, even if they didn't even realize that's what they were doing, because the song talks about all these things that happened to us historically, but as Indigenous people we're coming back. And that's the message of this song. And I didn't want to leave this presentation in a somber note. So I wanted to share these words. It's the only portion of the video.
Now and that's a raw calling time to put a foot down and quit the women and the ballin'. Dry away the tears of all people that they can stand. When a person is alone, he has no chance against a man. But when the people that they can raise arms together, we have the capability of changing history forever. First, we gotta retrieve our pride. That's why I spread the word by my mind. Next, we gotta get a culture back for the kids. It ain't gonna happen overnight, but we gotta do what we can so we get it together. ancient aliens. This is our time, we're calling on strong. Let's take a step back and sing our songs to the sound of the drum. Teach our children about the right and wrong.
We're coming strong, 'cause it's the only way we know to carry on. They're trying to take my soul away, but we survive it now, we're here to stay. We're coming back, coming strong, 'cause it's the only way we know to carry on. Yeah, yeah.
Did you guys get to hear that? Did you guys get to hear the words? Yeah? All right. Yeah, so the message behind that is like we're coming back and we're coming strong because as Indigenous people, that's the only way we know how to be. And that's true. So, let's see what's happening here. Hold on a sec. I'm just getting to my ending, so I had some specific words that I wanted to share with you. Oh, and it keeps going back. It's like, we are the generation of knowledge makers, healing our communities through the work that we do. We are our grandmothers and we are who our grandmothers and their grandmothers prayed for. We not only carry knowledge and hold it or keep it, we share it. And we find ways to adapt those into teachings into our body of work. Something that our ancestors were forbidden to do and punished for over 150 years. And now they stand behind us, guiding the work that we do as Indigenous peoples. Thank you.